We might have a doozy on our hands today, my friends. We have got a Bible problem, a bona fide concern here that lots of people have raised regarding the identity of this guy named Barabbas and the likelihood that he did or didn't exist at all. Now, the Bible holds it out in all four of the Gospels as being a legitimate historical thing. There's a guy named Barabbas. There was a tradition that existed by which the governor of Judea, the Roman governor, in this case Pontius Pilate, would let one prisoner go free in celebration of Passover. And the Gospels hold this guy out as being a real person who committed real crimes and is a contrast with the upright character of Jesus. Barabbas is a bad dude. He was an insurrectionist in a way that the gospel writers seem to think was legitimately bad or a problem, and they associate him with murder as well. So pretty tough character. And of course, his readers were supposed to be like, dang, they picked that guy, that creep over Jesus? That's a huge injustice. But some people, and let's not do the thing where we immediately demonize some people. So let me say it a little differently. Some very reasonable people look at this and say, I got some historical questions about this part of the narrative because of three reasons. One, they look at the name Barabbas and they see somebody whose name would literally translate son of the father, Barabbas. Like, I don't know that sounds like a totally legitimate name. It seems like a name that would maybe be made up to illustrate a theological point or to serve as a point of contrast with the Son of Man, perhaps. The reasonable person who reads the Bible with a critical eye might look at that and say, yeah, I got some questions about the name. Thing number two, there's no external reference to anybody actually named Barabbas. Not that you'd necessarily expect it. More on that in a minute. But, this is a character who ran afoul of the law, and maybe you'd think Josephus would mention him or something. We have extra biblical sources that seem pretty intrigued by the people who resisted the Roman government during this era. Maybe it's a little bit weird that this guy doesn't come up. Third red flag or yellow flag that the person questioning the authenticity of this part of the Bible might look at would be to say that this tradition by which the Roman governor would let people go at the Passover, there's no external record of that tradition having ever occurred. It doesn't seem like Rome would do that, and it seems like if they did, we would know about it. And again, it seems like maybe Josephus would make some mention of that, given how much he talks about Pontius Pilate. Before we respond to all of these questions, let me just say, the Bible can handle its business. It is no shrinking flower. And I think it's just got to be respected that anybody would take the time to look at it and poke at it. I think that's awesome. And I know that some people poke at it because they want it to be fake. I know other people poke at it because they want it to be true. And if they can find the weaknesses, they can win the argument. Other people poke at it because it's just a grand curiosity. Some people would never, ever, ever dare to poke at it because they would view that as somehow being sacrilegious. Some others poke at it because they suspect that there's a God behind this, but also, it's my soul. And so I want to think really, really, really hard about these kind of details and really all the things that are in the Bible, because the Bible isn't just a historical book or a book that just gives you some nice life lessons about how to get along with coworkers better. The Bible articulates a claim on the soul. It articulates a grand narrative of all of time and humanity and history, and also of each individual's human soul and the journey and the potential of being made right with their maker and eternity afterward. The stakes are huge. And so some of us, and by some of us, I mean like me, I can't help but think real hard about it because I really care about the implications of this. And as a result, a question like this one about Barabbas that might seem like a side note or a footnote to some is a big deal to me. So let's think about this thing. Barabbas, the name, son of the father. Well, I suppose there are a lot of ways that we could have ended up with that name. Way number one is just actually the guy's name. I don't know, weird names happen. I'm not aware of anybody else with that name in the ancient or classical world, but I haven't looked up everybody's name ever. Not all the names come down through history, so I don't know. Maybe that's a guy's name, and somebody was making a point with how they named him. Maybe it was a nickname that he took on, like a lot of revolutionaries do. Maybe that's what we're dealing with here, and his real name was like Carl or Terry or Doug or something like that. Maybe also what you've got here is some providentially ordained thing by which God puts it together in such a way that somebody who has a name that does interestingly contrast with Jesus' preferred title is just happens to be the guy who's there to further illustrate some of the theological points that we were talking about yesterday. I mean, a key theme in the book of Matthew is the idea that God is sovereign enough to ordain the narrative flow of history to illustrate his points in grand ways and in teeny tiny subtle little flourishes as well. All of that to say, the name Barabbas doesn't particularly trouble me. Of greater concern, I think, is that we've never heard of this tradition. Now, again, I'm going to arrive at a point here where I tell you that I'm at peace with it because, honestly, I am at peace with it. This is something I've thought about before. But I get it. It's way more satisfying when you read through the Bible and you come across the stuff that is like, well, wait a minute, did that happen? And then you go look it up and you're like, oh, dang, yep, it did. Right when it was supposed to, right where it was supposed to, with all the people who were supposed to be there. Finding out that all the governors and acts are all in the right place at exactly the right time is really reassuring to me. I appreciate that the Bible holds itself out as being a book that is set against the backdrop of history, and then it lines up with history. Historically, what we have found is that every time people start to say, like, that thing wasn't there, it's just wrong. Like, for example, Nineveh, some sands in the desert shift, and it turns out the biblical record was right. The Bible has been vindicated by the uncovering of history again and again and again and again. And that shouldn't surprise us, even if you're listening and you don't think there's a God behind it, because it has stood the test of time as a historical document. Remember, the kind of historical criticism we've subjected the Bible to is a relatively recent innovation. This has been thought of as history for a very long time, and therefore somewhat debunkable history if it was wrong. But it stays with us because it passed the test of reliability for the original audience, who would have had the easiest time dismissing it as a historical fraud, and continues to stand that historical test the more we dig into it. All of that to say, that's like my third all of that to say, I am inclined to believe that this was a practice that fits within especially the behavior of Pontius Pilate. These Jews are horribly difficult to placate. We got to keep them happy to impress the emperor. Pilate's under all kinds of pressure. We know that he's made other weird concessions that he hadn't really thought through very carefully. We know he's doing a balancing act between making Rome happy by enforcing strict Roman justice, but also keeping his subjects happy so that he keeps his job. We also know that there is a grand tradition dating back hundreds of years to the innovations of Cyrus the Great starting in the 530s BC that said, hey, you get the best results when you're an emperor if you placate their local deity a little bit. Find out what the ground rules of their local deity is and, make a concession. Make a donation, dress up like the local priests, stab the bull if you're supposed to stab their ritual bull. Or if they don't do bull stabbing, well, then definitely don't stab their bull. If they rub blood on stuff, rub some blood on the stuff. It won't hurt you as a guest governor or a guest emperor. It'll only endear you to them. Participate in the religious festivals, maybe. In keeping with the idea of the Jewish people having this belief in atonement and some sort of forgiveness in a year of Jubilee, maybe Pilate looks at that with a partial understanding and is like, it seems like this would kind of be in keeping with the themes I'm hearing about religiously and what I'm kind of gathering about this Passover idea. Yeah, maybe we'll just try this and it'll fit in. So though there is no extra biblical record of this exact tradition, we do have all kinds of evidence from the Persian Empire, the Alexandrian Empire, the Seleucid Empire, the Ptolemaic Empire, the Roman Empire, and other smaller kingdoms that had come and gone and occupied other locations post-Assyria that appeasing local gods by participating in their traditions, even in a ham-fisted way, was a good idea. It seems to me that Pilate's behavior is in keeping with historical norms that existed for occupied people in the ancient Near East. Third objection is that we just don't hear about Barabbas at all externally. I think that comes down to this. If what he did was at all successful, maybe the one historian who really takes big swipes at this, that being Josephus, would have thought of it. But a lot of people rebelled. There's so much tumult going on right now that I suppose if Josephus wanted to tell you about all of the wondrous works that insurrectionists and murderers did trying to get rid of Rome, there wouldn't be enough pages and enough ink in the entire world to spell that all out. So he had to make selections and give us stuff that moved forward a grand narrative. And I suppose he could have picked from 100 different Barabbases to indicate the kind of pressure and the foment of rebellion that was present and right there under the surface during Pontius Pilate's reign and during the reigns of the guys who came before him, like Valerius Gratus. I don't think it's a huge problem that we don't hear about Barabbas outside of the Bible. And further, we have to remember that with all of these things, the Christians felt like this was documented well enough. They thought of the Bible as history, particularly the way Luke wrote it. Luke's writing is in keeping with the tradition of Herodotus of Halicarnassus, who we're going to learn a lot about when we get into Esther here real soon. There'd been a way that history had been written for about 400 years in the Eastern Mediterranean world, and it had bled over into the Western Mediterranean world. And Luke is writing keeping with it. He describes his sources, how he's going to do things, what his methodology is, setting out to give an orderly narrative style account. I think Christians would have looked at this and been like, well, we don't really need to preserve anything else. We have recorded Barabbas. And they didn't think in terms of there being a Bible initially, so the term extra-biblical wouldn't have meant anything to them at all. It is only more recently, as we're separated from these events by lots and lots of years, that we look back on it and we really wish that there was a little bit more evidence to corroborate things. Sometimes we spend more time yearning for even more evidence to corroborate things extra-biblically instead of appreciating that the extra-biblical corroboration we have is off the charts by comparison to any other ancient document. Look, you can see my biases. For me, it matters that the events in this book are reliably recorded. Other people have theological systems or reads on the text or assign stakes to the text where they're like, I can actually live with some of it being wrong, and that's okay. I know that both types are right here in this conversation right now, and the best I can do is think it through as hard as I can and turn over the cards of my biases. I think it's from God. I think it's reliable, and I don't just think that because I hope so. I think that because I looked at it really carefully. I think about this stuff a lot, and I keep coming back to it, even when I once tried to walk away from Christianity for reasons that we've discussed elsewhere. And I just found myself repeatedly compelled by the God character of the whole thing, by the logical cohesion of the whole thing, but I also found myself compelled by the stunning historical reliability of the thing, especially considered that it isn't written as a history book. It's written as a theological description of events to point people toward the reality of Christ as the Son of God, the Messiah, God in the flesh. Those are my thoughts on Barabbas. We talk about these things from time to time over on the subreddit. It's reddit.com, and then you just search TMBH podcast. It's linked at the bottom of all of these. I try not to encourage people to go to Reddit too much because that place can be a real adventure. But if you're over there anyway, you want to hear what people are thinking about it, you can go check that out. And I would be interested to hear your thoughts on what you do with the whole Barabbas controversy. As for me, I feel a ton of peace about it. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.